What is the most insane thing you've ever seen in a 70s movie? It's not just about directors filming nude actresses, it's about what they force them to do on camera. Imagine this, a forest scene where the female protagonist doesn't encounter a slasher, but a literal wild beast. What happens next was so primal and graphic that in 1975, censors went pale with rage. This was Walerian Bortic's The Beast, and it was banned almost everywhere immediately after its premiere. And I have 10 more stories just like that. If you missed the first two parts of our Forbidden Archive, don't worry. The concentration of madness here is even higher. Today we're digging into the corners of European and Japanese cinema that polite society prefers to forget. I'm going to show you films that broke the audience's psyche and destroyed the actors' careers. Stay until the end. At number 1, we have a legend that is still feared by TV networks even in late-night slots. Let's get into it. Film number 10 is Female Prisoner Scorpion, Jailhouse 41 from 1972. To understand why Japanese exploitation cinema of the 70s was light years ahead of the West, you have to look at Meiko Kaji. This isn't just a prison movie, it's a hallucinatory, blood-soaked poem about feminine rage. Meiko Kaji plays Matsu, known as Scorpion, a woman who has been betrayed, tortured, and thrown into a literal hellhole. But she doesn't just survive, she becomes a silent, vengeful deity. The visuals here are staggering. Director Shunya used experimental camera angles, saturated colors, and theatrical staging that make the brutal violence feel like high art. There's a specific scene involving a group of escapees in a desolate wasteland that looks more like a surrealist painting than a grindhouse flick. This is where the male gaze of the 70s gets completely dismantled. Matsu doesn't look at the camera for the viewer's pleasure. She looks through the camera with a stare that promises death. Censors in the West were baffled by it. It was too artistic to be mere trash, but too violent and provocative to be mainstream. The film's focus on the female body as a weapon of rebellion rather than a target of lust was revolutionary. It influenced everyone from Quentin Tarantino to Lady Snowblood. It pushes the boundaries of the women in prison subgenre so far that it practically invented its own category of forbidden art. Film number 9, The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh, 1971. If there's a patron saint of 70s provocative cinema, it is Edwidge Fenech. In The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh, she delivers a performance that defined the Italian giallo for an entire decade. This film is a cocktail of high-fashion elegance and dark, perverted obsession. Fenech plays a woman caught between a cold husband, a violent ex-lover, and a mysterious blackmailer who knows her darkest sexual secrets. The provocation here isn't just in the nudity, it's in the atmosphere of constant, lurking danger. The film uses Fenech's incredible cinematic presence to create a sense of vulnerability that feels almost uncomfortable to watch. There are scenes in sun-drenched European villas and dark, rain-slicked streets that look like a Vogue photo shoot gone horribly wrong. When it was released, it faced massive scrutiny. The blend of psychological torture and stylized eroticism was a hallmark of director Sergio Martino, who knew exactly how to tease the audience before pulling the rug out. Censors were particularly obsessed with the film's shower scene and the intense, dreamlike editing that blurred the line between pleasure and pain. It was banned and cut in multiple regions because it made the vice look too enticing. It remains the ultimate example of why the 70s was the only time you could combine a high-budget thriller with the raw, unfiltered energy of an underground cult film. Film number 08, Emmanuelle, 1974. When we talk about the 1970s, there is one name that defines the entire era of high-class provocation, Emmanuelle. Released in 1974, this film didn't just break the rules. It rewrote the entire legal and social landscape of European cinema.
Starring the ethereal Sylvia Christel, this wasn't some cheap, grainy underground flick. It was a lush, expensive, and visually breathtaking masterpiece that brought eroticism into the mainstream. It's the story of a young woman traveling to Bangkok to join her diplomat husband, only to be initiated into a world of uninhibited sexual exploration. The forbidden nature of this film starts with its production. Director Jaeckin treated every frame like a high-end fashion shoot for Vogue. The lighting, the soft focus, and the legendary wicker chair, which became a global symbol of the film, created an aesthetic that was too beautiful to ignore. But beneath the beauty was a level of frankness that terrified censors. In France, the film was so massively successful that the government literally had to invent a new tax category, the X tax, specifically to milk the profits from its record-breaking box office run. It played in some Parisian theaters for over a decade straight. The real scandal, however, was in the specific sequences that pushed the R rating into X rating territory. There is the infamous airplane scene, which pushed the boundaries of what could be shown in a public space, and the surreal, hallucinatory sequences in the Thai underground. Censors in the UK, the US, and even more conservative parts of Europe were caught in a trap. They wanted to ban it for its obscenity, but they couldn't deny its artistic merit and massive public demand. Sylvia Christel became the ultimate icon of the 70s, a woman who was both a victim of the male gaze and a pioneer of her own liberation. To this day, Emmanuelle remains the benchmark for provocative cinema because it proved that you could combine raw sexual energy with elite cinematography. It wasn't just a movie you watched, it was a movie you talked about in whispers, a forbidden rite of passage for an entire generation of filmgoers. Film number 07, Salon Kitty, 1976. If Emmanuelle was the dream, then Tinto Brass's Salon Kitty is the nightmare. This is arguably one of the most disturbing and visually aggressive films ever made by a mainstream director. Brass, who would later become famous for the notorious Caligula, took a real-life historical footnote and turned it into a dark, perverted masterpiece of political horror. Set in Nazi Germany, the film follows a high-end brothel, Salon Kitty, where every room is bugged with microphones to catch high-ranking officials in their most vulnerable, debauched moments. This film is the definition of too far. The provocation here is multi-layered. First, there's the sheer scale of the production. The sets are massive, the costumes are impeccable, and the cinematography is sharp and cold. But then there is the content. Tinto Brass blends extreme eroticism with the grotesque reality of the Third Reich. It's a film about power, surveillance, and the dehumanization of both the women working in the salon and the men visiting them. The scenes that caused the most outrage involved the training of the women, sequences that were so graphic and psychologically brutal that they were cut or censored in almost every territory. The film doesn't just show nudity, it shows the intersection of sex and fascism in a way that makes the viewer feel like a voyeur to a crime. When it was released, critics were horrified. They didn't know whether to praise Brass for his bold political commentary or condemn him for his filthy obsession with the human body. In the UK, it was heavily butchered by the BBFC. In Italy, it faced multiple court cases. The film is forbidden because it forces you to look at the darkest parts of human history through a lens of raw provocation. It uses the bait of the brothel to trap the audience into a story about how absolute power corrupts the most intimate parts of our lives. Even 50 years later, Salon Kitty stands as a cold, hard reminder that the 70s were a time when directors were willing to burn their careers to the ground just to show the world something it didn't want to see. Film 06, Vampyros Lesbos, 1971. If there's a film that perfectly captures the trippy, fever dream eroticism of the early 70s, it is Jesús Franco's Vampyros Lesbos. This isn't your grandfather's Dracula story. It is a high-fashion, psychedelic nightmare that blends vampire mythology with a level of stylized provocation that left 1971 audiences speechless. Set against the sun-bleached, stark landscapes of the Mediterranean, the film stars the hauntingly beautiful Soledad Miranda, a woman whose cinematic presence was so powerful it reached legendary status after her tragic, untimely death shortly after filming. The bait here is incredible. The film uses Miranda's cold, aristocratic beauty to lure the viewer into a plot that feels more like an avant-garde music video than a horror movie. Every scene is meticulously framed like a fashion editorial, saturated colors, extreme close-ups of eyes and lips, and a soundtrack that is widely considered the greatest erotic acid jazz score in history. But don't let the style fool you. The content was pure poison for the censors of the time. The film's frank, uninhibited exploration of feminine desire and blood loss was so aggressive that it was banned, cut, and buried in various territories for decades. The most forbidden aspect of Vampyros Lesbos is its dreamlike pacing. There's a legendary sequence involving a ritualistic stage performance that pushes the boundaries of performance art and raw eroticism. Censors didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't pornographic in the traditional sense, but it was so charged with a specific dark energy that it felt dangerous. It's a film that plays with the vampire trope as a metaphor for sexual liberation, and in 1971, that was enough to get you blacklisted. Even today, watching the restored version, you can feel the heat coming off the screen. It's a masterpiece of the forbidden, because it proves that style, when combined with a fearless actress like Soledad Miranda, is the ultimate weapon against censorship.
Now we get to the film I mentioned in the hook, the one that made the censors' blood run cold. Valerian Borowczyk was already a respected, award-winning artist when he decided to set his career on fire with The Beast. This is arguably the most scandalous film of the entire decade, a surrealist folk horror story that takes a centuries-old French legend and turns it into a graphic, visceral explosion of primal desire. If you ever wondered where the limit was in 1970s cinema, this film is the limit. The story revolves around an American heiress visiting a decaying French estate for an arranged marriage, only to be haunted by the dark history of the family's ancestors. The hook that everyone talks about, the scene that was banned in almost every country on Earth, is the infamous dream sequence in the forest. It is a 10-minute-long, uninterrupted encounter between a woman and a literal, hairy forest monster. Borowczyk didn't use metaphors or shadows. He showed everything with a clinical, almost documentary-like precision that was unheard of in 1975. The outrage was instantaneous. In the UK, the film was rejected outright by the BBFC. In France, it caused riots and protests. Critics called it filthy and animalistic, but Borowczyk defended it as a pure exploration of the subconscious. The visual bait here is the contrast between the high society, aristocratic setting and the raw, beastly nature of the forest scenes. The film's star, Sirpa Lane, gives a performance so physically and emotionally intense that it's almost painful to watch. It's forbidden because it dares to show the intersection of human civilization and animal instinct without blinking. Even 50 years later, The Beast remains the ultimate dare for any cinephile. It is the peak of 70s provocation, a film that refuses to be ignored no matter how much the censors try to bury it. Film number 4, I Am Curious, Blue, 1970. If you want to talk about the film that broke the back of American censorship forever, you have to talk about the sweetest sensation, I Am Curious, Blue. This film, along with its twin, I Am Curious Yellow, wasn't just a movie, it was a legal earthquake. Starring Lena Nyman, it follows a young woman's radical journey through the political and sexual landscape of late 60s and early 70s Sweden. But it wasn't the politics that caused the U.S. Customs to seize the film reels at the border. It was the raw, unsimulated energy of Lena's performance. The provocation here is a total lack of shame. Director Vilgo Schumann filmed his actors with a handheld, documentary-style camera that made every intimate moment feel real, unpolished, and dangerously close. There is no Hollywood lighting here, no soft focus to hide the reality of the human body.
Because of this, the film was labeled obscene in the United States, leading to a massive Supreme Court battle. Theater managers who dared to screen it were arrested, and the film became the ultimate forbidden fruit for a generation of rebels. The visual bait is the sheer honesty of Lena Nyman. She isn't a plastic starlet. She is a real person with a real body, and her fearlessness in front of the camera was a middle finger to every censor in the world. The scenes in the Swedish countryside and the urban protests created a blue mood, melancholic, cold, but incredibly charged. It's forbidden because it dared to suggest that a woman's curiosity, both intellectual and physical, was a revolutionary act. When you watch it now, you're not just watching a movie, you're watching the moment the old world died and the era of total cinematic freedom was born. It is the definition of a must-watch for anyone who wants to understand how the 70s truly changed everything.
We are now approaching the most controversial film ever made by a British director. Ken Russell's The Devils is a masterpiece of religious hysteria, political corruption, and absolute, unfiltered madness. Based on the real-life events in 17th century France, it stars Oliver Reed as a defiant priest and Vanessa Redgrave as a repressed hunchbacked nun. But the history is just a skeleton for Russell to hang some of the most shocking and visually aggressive imagery ever committed to celluloid. This film is the holy grail of censored cinema. Even today, over 50 years later, Warner Bros. Is still hesitant to release the full, uncut version. Why? Because the bait is so extreme it borders on the divine. The sets, designed by a young Derek Jarman, are stark, white, and clinical, making the red blood and the raw, provocative scenes of the nun's possessions stand out with terrifying clarity. There is a specific sequence known as the Rape of the Christ, which was so incendiary it was cut from almost every version of the film for decades. The provocation isn't just for the sake of shock, it's a high-art assault on hypocrisy. Vanessa Redgrave's performance is a masterclass in psychological breakdown. Her obsession with Reed's character leads to a spiral of forbidden rituals that censors at the BBFC and the MPAA couldn't handle. It was banned in Italy, and the actors were threatened with arrest if they set foot in the country. It's forbidden because it attacks the most powerful institutions in the world using the most provocative tools available to a filmmaker. It is loud, it is violent, and it is incredibly beautiful in its ugliness. If there is one film in this list that proves the 70s were the danger zone of cinema, it is The Devils. It's not just the movie, it's an exorcism of the audience's expectations. Film number 02, Belladonna of Sadness, 1973. If you think animation is for kids, Belladonna of Sadness will shatter that delusion in the first 5 minutes. This Japanese masterpiece is the final film in Mushi Productions' Animorama trilogy, and it is a breathtaking, watercolor-drenched descent into madness, eroticism, and occult rebellion. Set in a stylized medieval France, it tells the story of Jeanne, a young woman who is brutally assaulted by a local lord on her wedding night and subsequently makes a pact with the devil to gain the power of provocation and revenge. The bait here is unlike anything else in this archive. Instead of traditional animation, director Eiichi Yamamoto uses flowing, psychedelic watercolor paintings that bleed across the screen like liquid silk. The visuals are heavily inspired by Art Nouveau and the erotic illustrations of Aubrey Beardsley. But don't let the art label fool you. The content is as raw and forbidden as it gets. The film uses metamorphosis and surrealist imagery to depict Jeanne's sexual awakening and her transformation into a belladonna, a beautiful but deadly flower. The most scandalous sequence involves a massive, town-wide ritual that pushed the boundaries of 1973 censorship to the breaking point. It's a literal explosion of color, sound, and forbidding shapes that represent the ultimate loss of control. Censors in the West didn't even know how to classify it. Was it high art? Was it pornography? Was it a political manifesto? It was all three. It was forbidden because it suggested that a woman's pleasure and her rage were one and the same, a power so great it could topple kings and churches.
For decades, this film was a lost legend, whispered about in cult circles, but impossible to find. It is a visual drug, a fever dream of the 70s, that proves the most provocative images aren't always filmed. Sometimes they are painted in blood and gold. Film number 1. In the Realm of the Senses, 1976. If you think you've seen provocative cinema, you haven't seen what happened in Japan in 1976. In the Realm of the Senses is not just a movie, it is a legal and cultural explosion that remains one of the most censored films in history. Directed by the rebellious Nagisa Ōshima, it tells the true story of Sada Abe, a woman whose obsessive, all-consuming love affair with her master led to a spiral of desire that transcended every law of man and nature. The forbidden hook here is simple but lethal. Ōshima refused to fake anything. Every single intimate encounter between the leads, Eiko Matsuda and Tatsuya Fuji, was real. This wasn't artistic suggestion. It was a raw, unfiltered documentation of two people losing their minds and bodies to each other. Because of Japan's strict obscenity laws, the film footage had to be smuggled out of the country in secret to be processed and edited in France. When it finally premiered at the New York Film Festival, it was seized by U.S. Customs, leading to a massive international scandal that turned Ōshima into a global symbol of cinematic defiance. The visual bait here is the contrast between the elegant traditional Japanese settings and the increasingly dark, forbidden rituals the couple performs as they isolate themselves from the world. As the story progresses, the beauty of the kimonos and the tea houses is replaced by a claustrophobic atmosphere of obsession. The final act contains a sequence so shocking and visceral that it is still blurred or cut in many versions today. It's forbidden because it dares to suggest that ultimate pleasure is inseparable from ultimate destruction. Eiko Matsuda's performance is a masterclass in fearlessness. She became a pariah in Japan because of this role, effectively ending her mainstream career. It is the undisputed #1 for this archive because it is the only film that actually crossed the line between acting and reality. It is a beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely banned masterpiece that proves that in the 70s, some directors weren't just making movies, they were living them. The 1970s was a decade that refused to look away, and as you've seen, these 10 films pushed that defiance to its absolute limit. From the high-fashion provocations of Europe to the blood-soaked, vengeful masterpieces of Japan, cinema back then was a dangerous game with no safety net. But believe it or not, we've still only scratched the surface. There are archives out there that are even darker, even more forbidden, and even more visually stunning than what you saw today. If you want to see the films that were actually burned by the authorities and hidden from the public for over 50 years, you know what to do. Subscribe and hit the bell icon, because part 4 is going to take us into the most extreme corners of the 80s, a decade where the rules didn't just break, they disappeared entirely. Thanks for watching, keep it cinematic, and I'll see you in the next archive.